I don't guess we should ever take that joke into the area of mentation. I used to have a pretty good mind before the accident. We ready? Now some of you laugh. You all right. I thought we'd have perhaps figure of speech because we're damn sure going to have it unless maybe that would stop it. I was going to point out that we could consider some more living anthropological notes that normally go unnoted regarding city life. There's a little thing, and I would bet that everybody's occupation has got an example of this. But it goes like this, that life allows the intellect to come up and to coin one word, or it's just very short, but very often one word descriptions that adequately cover what would otherwise be a very lengthy, complex, verbal mapping of something out there. For instance, one that hit me first, that surely all of you know, carpet layers. When you're taking carpet, and you're running it around like a step, you're bending it, or around a corner on a step. And with almost any carpet except very, very expensive carpet, at any rate, if it's just fair carpet or cheap carpet, they say the carpet grins. Does everybody understand? You can see through the nap, through the carpet itself, into the backing. Now, once you hear that, some of you, the way you're acting, maybe you've never heard it, but you look at almost any carpet, well, just cheap carpet at least, and if somebody has run it around the edge of a stair, you can see the backing of the carpet. It grins. And so once you know that, you don't have to be a carpet layer. I know some of you have other things to do. But once you hear it, it explains it all. But now consider that one word. If some carpet layers were talking, or if you were talking, and some friend of yours says, we're going to carpet these, we put in, you finished up the attic, and we decided instead of these old stairs, we had some carpet left over, we're going to carpet it. And perhaps you say, well, go over there and hold it, and fold over, and you say, well, you do realize it's going to grin. And I say, he's never heard it. And he says, what? Think about what it would take. Well, look how long it took me to explain a carpet grinning. But once you know it, the word is not only adequate, it is apt. But at least it's adequate was the main thing, is that life allows this. And it goes on all sorts of things. Engines loping. Turntables rumbling. The world is full of them. But, music. How about if you're a musician? To refer to somebody else's music or their band is Mickey. If that's too hip for you, the original phrase was Mickey Mouse, which I guess to some of you still wouldn't explain much. But, well, no offense, but among ordinary people, they just say now among musicians that somebody just say, well, it's just Mickey, a Mickey band or Mickey music. Or painting. I don't know whether they still use this, but at one time it was in the beginning of so-called modern art back in the first part of this century or into the first 2 or 3 decades, they would refer certain artists in the same way, sort of parallel to the musicians and the idea of Mickey music. They referred to a kind of representational painting, stuff that Norman Rockwell's did and Wyeth's and some of them back then. Among the more modern, hipper painters, they referred to it as covers. It was the kind of thing that would go on a magazine cover. It was the kind of thing that Rockwell would do for the Saturday Evening Post before it bought the farm. But once you know that, if you heard somebody refer to a painting as, it ain't bad for a cover, you might think, what the hell is he talking about? But then once you hear it, then you look and you know what they meant. Now, after all of that, I was going to point out that although life allows that, and it makes for a very efficient kind of quick study, quick way to communicate between people that explains something that would take many more words. The carpet, the kind of music. I didn't go into that, but to try and explain what a Mickey band is. That'd probably take as long as any I came up with, or an engine loping. Anyway, you can understand that if somebody just had the average knowledge of a field, of internal combustion engines, of the reproduction of music, or carpet laying, you understand it would take sentences, many, many words, hundreds, might take more than 1,000 words, whereas grin, rumble, cover, Mickey, everybody, once you know it, go, yeah. But now consider this. Life affords no such mapping regarding man's own internal states. Contraire. The ordinary descriptions are used that apparently are attempting to describe man's psychological states, are withal verbose, oftentimes apparently interminable, always self-referring, and dissatisfyingly conclusive, which those of you keeping up to speed, I guess we could call it episodically conclusive, which is unsatisfying. But I consider every attempt to describe man's state of any kind, his general state, his individual state, all the way from the world's myths into religions, into contemporary psychology, or just everyday conversation between people, of people trying to describe the kind of guy humanity is. People individually attempting to describe what kind of guy they are. People attempting to describe what kind of guy somebody else is. Your good friend that you're trying to defend to somebody that says, you're welcome to come to the party, but don't bring that friend of yours. Don't bring your father back here. And you think, wait a minute. I know why you say that, but let me tell you, you just don't know him or her. You understand? There is no available shorthand. Think about it a second. I got a second. That's enough. Think about it. Contraire. See, I do know a foreign word. Contraire, contraire, contraire. Que pasa? It would seem that from all the religious, all the mythological, all the psychological attempts to describe man, that if you in fact tried to stand up to ordinary consciousness and say, can't we cut down the description that you just tried to do? You're trying to tell about this guy that's always going around washing his hands all the time, washing his hands day and night, or this guy that he's been married or lived with 17 women, and every one of them ran around on him, was unfaithful according to him. Whatever it is, you say, well, isn't there some way that you could describe this in a quicker way? Or if you said, all right, you're welcome to the party to somebody else, but don't bring that friend of yours. Siegfried, don't bring him. Another person says, wait a minute. I know why you say that. A lot of people, but let me tell you something about him. And so he starts trying to describe Siegfried to you so that you will allow him to tag along. Could you make this short? If I don't get home and start the party, it's only 3 days away, I'll be here forever. What is it you're trying to tell me? There is no shortcut available. It is as though life denies. There is no way. It's just not in the currency of the city intellect for there to be anything comparable to, instead of Siegfried, you say, well, I'll make it easier for you. Not him in general. How about under specific conditions? Let me bring Siegfried to the party. I know what you're saying, but Siegfried gets a few drinks and he grins. He lopes. Siegfried gets a few drinks in him and he's a Mickey band. Think about it. There are no such descriptions. Now, in the midst of the kind of episodic attempted explanations that people make about one another, life does this, but it's just like the pickup notes. For those who know music, before the measure starts, before the song actually starts officially, you can have pickup notes. You can have pickup syllables and meters parts of meters in rhyme, in poetry. And so there are people that say, wait a minute, don't bring Siegfried. And you go, why? Well, the guy's I guess I better say that. The guy's a bastard. Now, people will try that. Now, that's not unusual. I was going to say something worse. The guy's a drunk. Will anybody let that stand? Anybody that has a vested interest in the conversation, that is, the interplay of energy. No. You don't have to be his best friend. You can just be almost a casual bystander. But you hear somebody cut down to a one word. Well, he grins. You wrap him around the steps and he grins. He's cheap. You know, he gets out in public and his engine is prone to lope and skip. If that goes on in life generally, someone will say, well, wait a minute. They will not let it stand. It's as though by life having constructed man's intellect so that it must take the infinite, silent, primary processes of life and to cut them, to turn them into things specific, it's almost as though then, on top of that, life demands that man then explain, once it's cut the process into a thing specific, not let it stay there, but then start explaining that anew from certain views in ways that are more complex than if you had tried to perceive and tried to handle just the processes themselves before the verbs were turned into nouns. The gestures didn't help. Well, all right. How about this? It's almost like this then. It's almost as though life does not want a bunch of people running around downtown in the city that are able to think with, to deal in, and to communicate in a kind of meaningful shorthand. How's that? It is. Regarding man's state, because now remember, and I didn't pick out everybody's, but every profession has got these one word, I'm sure, I'm positive, one word descriptions that cover a multitude of verbal, intellectual landscapes just by saying the carpet grins. Medicine, law, automobile mechanics. But when you get in here, it's as though life does not want people operating on that basis. When it's even attempted, let me back up, some of you didn't seem to really get much, but when it's attempted, and it does go on, and if your intellect was only three-dimensional, you could sit there in your own mind and say, wait a minute, there are exceptions to that, or you're not correct, because people do accuse one another. They just say, you're stupid, you're dumb. Or somebody in the Northern Ireland would turn around and say, he's nothing but a Catholic, or the other way, he's nothing but a Protestant. And this goes on. But do you see that that is the crudest level? And if it was left there, which is normally not, but if it was left there from a contemporary view, if you were just use you as an example, generically, of a contemporary intellect, if you were confronted with that, you would judge that to be very, very unsophisticated. Do you follow? I'll try. If you were, and this goes on, if you're confronted right now, if you're in a situation somewhere in the world, the purple people in religion is in conflict with the Paisley people, as always are, and you heard somebody, and you were visiting over there, and Siegfried was married to a girl one time whose sister-in-law was in some way related to some Paisleys, and so you're over at the Paisley family, and they're sitting around, and somebody made a comment like, all the greens suck. And let's say that you didn't have a particular interest and you realize after you heard it there's no sense me sitting here trying to get into discussion. But what would you think, using you as a exemplary, contemporary intellectual? You would consider the people, properly so, from a relative three-dimensional view, to be extremely crude. Listen, and I'm trying to say it so that I'm not saying that you had any interest. You're not Green or Paisley, whether it was race, religion, or whatever. But you understand that if somebody can apparently come up with a shorthand and just say, the Greens suck, and everybody's sitting around the table, yeah, the whole family, you realize you're not dealing with probably any of the immediate family of, let's say, Albert Schweitzer or Bertrand Russell's in-laws. You're dealing with, if it flew, and that was the end of it there in that environment, that somebody says that and everybody in the room goes, yeah, or nobody can test it, you do understand you're dealing with a very basic, very minimal level of intelligence. It's got nothing to do with prejudice, it's got nothing to do with religion or any of that. It's just that if intellectually, under certain conditions, if that kind of episodic shorthand is allowed to go, and it seems to be satisfying to those involved right then, my advice to you, if you were there, is get out as soon as you can. You're not in for any kind of enlightenment, and you couldn't end up replaying one of the passive parts in that movie Deliverance. You could be in trouble before it's over. I knew I'd get their attention. It's just sometimes you got to keep going lower and lower until you get that crude level as an example, and then they go, oh yeah. There's nothing seems to bring about a kind with certain crowds with a certain kind of cerebral enlightenment, like bring it down to examples, into kind of sodomy and such as that. Many times people, oh yeah, now I understand. Let's don't dwell on that. After all that, do you now see what I was trying to point your attention toward? That although it does go on in life, that people do dismiss each other. Staying in a bar, just somebody drives by and cuts in your lane of traffic, and you holler out, "You idiot!" All right, that apparently is a very shorthand. You don't know who it was, but it's similar to hollering, "Your engine lopes, your carpet grins." That you apparently have dismissed the person, whether you knew him or not, in this case a stranger, by that. But again, do you see? If we take that as an example, at least in that one episode of your life, no matter if you got a PhD, no matter if you're a priest or a rabbi or some honest person, if you let that slide yourself, if you let it slide that you hollered at the guy just because he pulled and you hollered, "Well, you idiot!" Got nothing to do with morality or religion or any of that. You do understand from a certain quite real view, it's not a city view, not an ordinary, but from a very real view, you have allowed yourself to be about as crude as possible. That is the intellect operating at a minimal level, just enough to kind of talk. You could have just almost as easily given him a good old Brooklyn hello, just. You didn't even have to say anything, but that's about the level at which the intellect is operating for you to accept yourself. See, I'm putting it in your hands now instead of you in some context of you and other people. If you will say or even think something that crude to just look at something or hear about something and say, those idiots, and you let that go, you are dealing yourself at an absolute minimal level. But now strike, any of you might be hearing this anew, any relative judgment of whether it's decent or civilized, etc. It is simply that the intellect, when it operates at that kind of shorthand level with ordinary people, if it does, is almost within a flicker of the juice being turned off. It simply is. And it's not right or wrong, good or evil, although that's the way it would become discussed and analyzed if this fell into the general hopper of ordinary intelligence. On a wider level, back to where I was trying to get you to see, on a wider level, talking about just the average city intellectual operations of a group of people, this normally is now considered to be gauche at least, unacceptable, uninformative, inhumane. That is, for one person amongst a group of we're talking about average city intelligence now, for somebody or some group to make a statement to dismiss or to explain some other person or some other group with like one word, it's just considered, even if you don't have a vested interest yourself, it is considered in general that is not helpful. That is no explanation for a reason. But what I was trying to twist your head before we got into this far, which I guess to some of you now it does make some reasonable sense, was simply that it would almost seem as though life did not want any numbers of people running around in the city that were capable of thinking in one words, that were capable of looking at complex behavior internally. Now forget externally, forget people pulling in front of you and the Greens and the Presley's fighting over religious symbols or something. Now, internally, it's as though life does not want people in general, any large number of people running around loose that can think about human behavior in what amounts to one word capsules. The complexity, apparently, of human behavior, and to have people that can look around and see something that has filled up 3,000 years worth of philosophers and would-be psychologists studying why do people act so-and-so, and for a guy to turn around and to look and realize, oh, grins, rumble, wow and flutter. That's what that is, wow and flutter. And for the person to understand it. Now, that'd be bad enough from certain city views. But it's as though, as I said, that life does not want men, people, notice I didn't say just one person, running around that can think like this, can deal with the complexity, apparent complexity of human nature on that level, and be able to communicate. Well, one person is not that bad. Because if it's one person, if that was all that ever did it, we couldn't even be talking about it. You wouldn't even hear it, because no one would ever know it. So there's got to be two people, like there's got to be two words. There's got to be two levels, two qualities of carpet, or you would never know that one grinned. You know, if there's only one level of carpet, and they all, when you bent them over, that you could see the backing of all of them, nobody ever said grinned, because that's the way carpet is. So if one person has a quick shot at some aspect of human nature and sees it, in a sense it's meaningless unless there's somebody else he can communicate it with. He meets somebody else and he says, and here's some song and dance going on, some form of city ordinary behavior. And you have philosophers around, priests, all sorts of people, analyzing it, writing books, criticizing it, writing a book of criticism on the criticism, etc. And this one guy looks at it and he says, grins. And he looks around, another guy said, what? And he looks at him and says, grins. And another guy goes, And it's two of them. It's as though life doesn't, it's almost as though life doesn't want that going on. Maybe two people, but damn sure not a whole bunch of people being able to do that. Remember, it's not just do that, but be able to communicate in some way. Does they go, yeah. I once knew a guy, maybe I should have saved it for a Cairo. I didn't actually know a guy. I heard about a guy that he used to say this regarding this sort of thing. He used to say, short thoughts, long brains. I'm not sure what it means, it just came to me. It is this kind of juncture that you might consider again without, of course, it being any form of criticism. But the way the secondary world works via man's intellect is that you have mucho talk and paucity of understanding. I know that sounds, I even got a laugh or two here, but it's not a criticism. It's simply the way, if you can see outside the limits, beyond the limits of ordinary city intelligence, that's the way it is. And that the guy I referred to that said short thoughts, long brains, there is real validity to that. It's not operational because you do not normally find it. But you can, I assume some of you can hear this, there is a kind of almost safe approach that if you get the sensation, if it's reported, that there is almost an interminable, staggering amount of talk, writing, discussion about something, even if the something is over here in an institution, say, and the flag on top of the institution says, we know all there is about carpet. The Carpet Institute, the carpet experts of the planet, let's say, and nobody disputes it. And it's there. And you decide you'll know something about carpets. And you start getting close and you find out there are lines of people out there. And they're going through some kind of ritual. They're out there discussing. They're having fist fights and arm wrestling matches. And they're waving books about carpet. And then there's another group waving an anti-book about a carpet. And it's just a continual kind of discussion just almost a Tower of Babel having to do with this, and yet it says, the center of carpet knowledge. Now, surely you hear, it should give, if you just were approaching being capable of extraordinary thought, it should give you some pause. If you had to explain it, I guess you might put it another way. You might just say, well, maybe I'll come back when things calm down. But I'm suggesting to you what is not normally analyzed in this way or thought about, that there is a unusable with ordinary people because it just helps prop up what they actually do think. But there is a kind of, I guess ordinary psychology would call it some kind of unconscious or unspoken, which is what's propping up that which is conscious. But there is a kind of unspoken, unanalyzed awareness that the more things are being discussed, in a quite real sense, the less they know. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't go there and get what would seem to be functional answers, responses, episodic responses. That you go and say, well, I'm having a certain problem with my carpet. It won't stay tacked down when I roll it around the edges of stairs. And after some, you might have to stand in line in 2 or 3 places, and one person may say, well, that's my lunch hour, and somebody says, hey, man, that ain't my job, go over there. But before it's over, somebody might say, well, we've heard about that. They were having that problem, I think it was in North Dakota one time. Try this. Oh, wait a minute, have you tried actually putting glue before you tacked it? No, I hadn't. Oh, good, try that. I think that's what worked. So you might leave, apparently, even though they said might work, and you might think, well, they didn't know for sure, but you feel like, if you're ordinary, what's your choice? You feel like, well, I accomplished something. It was not quite as bad as being on the Stillman water diet, but it's like I had to go in and put up with the ordinary bureaucracy. They ran me from one person to the other, and then the final person, the best they did was say, this might work. But my God, I've been here, is this for real? I've been here nearly 4 hours to get one guy that says, and he was looking at his watch like it was getting close, and he said, well, I think this works. I believe this worked in North Dakota, South Dakota. But you feel like, well, it's got to be worth something because, Jesus, it took a half a day out of my life. Right? Now back to contrary and withal. Where in ordinary city affairs, institutionally speaking, individually speaking, but it's apparently, as we've noted before, in city affairs, secondary affairs, the intellect is normally drawn to a place that seems institutionalized because, of course, the intellect doesn't do it this way, but what it amounts to is the ordinary intellect thinks, well, since nobody knows anything, at least if I get 100 dumb people that don't know anything, that's better than just dealing with one person that doesn't know anything. Everybody go to sleep? All right, I'll make that a Kairoot sometime because that is the definition, one definition of an institution of all sorts. Because then like looks around it wants some question about, who invented all this? Or why does carpet grin? And you ask one person here and there, and they go, I don't know, or they give you some dumb answer. And then you think for a second, or your intellect thinks for you, well, wait a minute, nobody knows the answer to this. But then life, in its magnanimity, in its big-heartedness, offers you institutions wherein you're not confronted with one dumb person, like some little cartoon strip of somebody sitting in front of a little thing with a soapbox, saying all answers about God and carpet here, and you ask them and they don't know anything. Life gives you an alternative. It has an institution wherein you don't deal with one person that doesn't know anything about their subject. You end up with hundreds, perhaps thousands, who don't know anything about the subject. But notice there is a difference between 1,000 people not knowing anything and one person. That is an institution. What I was trying to get you to consider was there is a quite valid reality, and it's not an error, and it's not anything that can be improved or seen to. But the more something is talked about, the less, in one real sense, it is understood. And it's true out in the city, it's true with institutions, but it's also, I hate to say this, or it might be true, how about that? Or maybe it was true in North Dakota. that this could be true in your own brain. But notice, that certainly cannot be correct because, as we all know, speaking for the city folks, if you don't know about something, what do? Well, you think about the mother. That doesn't sound like anything we were talking about just several minutes ago when everybody laughed about institutions. The more that they talk about something, instead of having one person that doesn't know, you've got 10,000 who don't know, and therefore yes, but people who are trying to figure out something themselves, people who have an interest in something, they think about it. They talk about it to themselves all the time and study it. I've heard that, yeah. You don't see any connection. But again, as I started to say, that cannot be true. If that's true, then things are very skewed. Because that means that under ordinary conditions, the more you think about something and talk about it, I'm talking about something that's interesting. I'm talking about something that may seem to be of real significance. The nature of life. Or what kind of guy I am. Since we have now dismissed city institutions and individuals, then who's left with an ordinary person? And they would think, myself. Still seeing no connection, I assume, to any of this. Well, I'll be blunt. Would you consider as insane, as non-sequential as it is in the ordinary world, that the more at the ordinary level that you would think, which is talking to yourself about something, the less likelihood there is at all that you're ever going to pop in to your own brain, know what's going on, and learn anything. It simply cannot be. Because now I'll say contrary for the city folks, that at the ordinary level, if you are going to learn about anything, what do you have to do? You've got to think about it. Anybody will tell you that. You got to talk about it. If it doesn't strike you immediately, the answer or the solution, the approach you should take, think about it, ponder it, study it. I've got more and more of my little brain molecules now involved with this problem. You've down there got an institution. You have the institution of me, my own intelligence. So I'm getting smart enough that I'm not at all sure there's other people walking around that know the answers that I need to know, much less these institutions. I guess I'm going to have to fall back on my own, as they're pleased to call it, intellectual resources. And some of you wonder if life actually has a sense of humor. Because in certain circles that is known, that is respected as being an exceptionally astute, serious person, that they go, well, no offense, I'm not bad-mouthing into religions or other philosophies. My interest runs much deeper. And I've even gone past the organized religions and cults, and I've even gotten down to the individuals, traveled throughout the lands, and met the individuals that seem to have been perhaps the spark behind some of these larger systems, and I met them. God bless them, no offense. I sat down and I communed with them, broke bread, talked with them. It took me just a few minutes, and I realized they don't know individually either. I guess it's up to me now, yeah, what? And that, in many circles, and don't look around, some of you, the circle's in you already, that is what passes, now I'm on the right track, or that's the kind of person who's going somewhere. As Cartwright would say, everybody's going somewhere. That would be, at the ordinary level, if there was anything valuably explained at the ordinary level of intelligence, that would obviously have to be the way that you would go after all of this. But you do not see that you have become your own institution. Instead of having, let us call it, one brain molecule at one time that you said, what's the meaning of life? Let's just say you ask it that. And that one brain molecule went, it's awfully close to 5. I get off at 5. In other words, it didn't know. But now let's say that was way back when you were just a little 12 or 13-year-old nipper. But since then, you have dragged in, apparently, other brain molecules. And that it's no longer satisfactory to you to operate on the basis of one brain nipper. Not you. So now you've got hundreds, nay, perhaps thousands of little brain molecules. And it's become complex enough now, the descriptions, the attempted analyzations, so that you don't notice that you can now ask these hundreds of thousands, and for those of you who are neurosurgeons, perhaps billions and billions, I know, instead of hundreds and thousands, of brain molecules now involved with this, and you ask them, okay, what's the meaning of life? They don't know either. But it's a difference. And you going up to one priest and saying, all right, where's all these one shoes on the highway coming from? And he says, I don't know. And then you go and you stand in front of the Vatican, and you could get out hundreds, thousands of people working for the church and say, all right, I got one question. This one priest didn't know. Over in Indianapolis, where I normally live, I want to know what's the significance and where does one shoe on the highway come from? You do not see the ignorance of the institution as being the same as the lack of knowledge of an individual. You are now so cerebrally complex that it does not seem to be the kind of simple answers, kind of simple questions and answers that you were engaged in when you were a younger person. Perhaps even 10 years ago, that you thought, well, all I was looking for was a certain answer to this. But now, I see it's much more complex than that. And the feel, as it's supposed to be, is that in some way I'm getting somewhere. I have gone from dealing with ignorant individuals. So the truth is, now I'm dealing with ignorant collections of individuals. Instead of dealing with one simple connection, one simple question I try to ask one brain molecule, which didn't know, I now ask billions and billions of them. Of course, the rest of that sentence is not forthcoming with ordinary intelligence, which is, do they know? It doesn't even arise. Once you're dealing with an institution, once you're dealing with it complex enough that we're not dealing, why does carpet grin? And you're looking at one piece of carpet, your piece of carpet, that you tried to fix your steps and you look at it and it looks terrible. Why does carpet grin? Or if we're going to answer that, we're going to have to go into some kind of history about how they produce carpet, why they do it in such a way, how much the market will bear. They could make it better to where it wouldn't grin, how much it would cost, what it would do to installation, can everybody install it? It would get very, very complicated, or at least very lengthy. Well, spare me all of that. But at the ordinary level, what's the choice? If you're not going to take the simple level, that you ask somebody, a carpet layer, why does carpet grin? He says it's cheap. Now you bought it. It's your carpet. Or maybe your mother gave it to you. Wait a minute. My mother's not cheap. Or you take it personally, like you're supposed to. The carpet's cheap and grins, and you ask the guy, why does it grin? He says, because it's cheap. He said the carpet was cheap, but you went, what? You won't accept that? What's the alternative? He probably couldn't tell you. You would have to go into a lengthy investigation or subject yourself to a lengthy detailing of the history brought to date to the production of carpet. Would you still know? Yeah. But it is completely different when it gets complex enough that a one-word explanation. Why is the carpet grins? Cheap. Why do the green people, why do they give us so much trouble, us decent Paisley folks? They're idiots. They're heathens. It's either that or look at the ordinary level to that which would be a more complex detailing. But when it gets more complex, the part that the intellect does not then answer, which it sort of does this, people even discuss this, as I was trying to do for you when I backed up, is a person can say, well, at an older level, when I was younger, when I thought in a more simplistic manner, I would ask myself the same kind of question, the serious question, what's the meaning of life? And my one little brain molecule didn't give me any more satisfaction than that carpet layer did. He said, why did carpet grin? He said, it's cheap. I asked my one brain cell back when I was younger, what's the meaning of life? Make your parents happy. Yeah. No. But now it got more complex. But when it gets more complex and you're dealing with what amounts to, even in here, that you're dealing with an institution, a collection, a complex, interminable detailing of what's going on, then the question doesn't arise when you say, well, now I'm not dealing with just one dumb priest, one dumb carpet layer, one dumb molecule up here. I'm now dealing, it's more complex. I've grown, I've expanded. Maybe I don't have all the answers, but at least, I'm not down to that simplistic level. And what you don't hear is somebody ask themselves, much less each other, like, is it any better? Is it more explanatory? And the answer, if the question could be asked, the answer then would be no. But notice, the question is not asked. That is for the purpose of complexity. That is for the purpose of institutions. That is for the purpose of cutting up processes into things. And then the things must take on their own explanation, and they come in what amounts to a secondary package of new complexity. But nobody notices. They're not supposed to. And the question does not arise, well, now that you are dealing with more complex explanations, theories, even more complex questions, is it any better? The question never arises. I shouldn't have been cheap enough to even theoretically say the answer would be no. Because if the question ever arose, you'd be talking about a different level of city life to begin with. But the question doesn't arise. And back to where I attempted to start us, it's almost as though life is not going to allow any number of people running around that can think in such a way. Well, I was going to wrap this paragraph, which I've already done, constructively, is to ask you to consider the ramifications and the potentials of this having to do with your own little neural networks, your own intelligence. The very places that you would be inclined to ordinarily look, this would suggest may not be the best place to look. The more detailed, the more complex, the more expansive might appear to be answers at a certain level. Might be what? Somebody trying to tell you that carpet grins because it's cheap. I'm sorry, I don't no. What I want an explanation that's just probably so tiring and boring and lengthy that I'll be sick of it, or maybe I'll die before you ever get to the end of it. But no thanks. No, I'm driving. Don't give me a one-word description. All right, I'll change the damn subject. Pick up a piece of something else we were talking about already. I wanted to, again, that only the submissive are repentant. And what we were talking about last time, I assume that some of you can now see. The submissive also can be seen as the non-growing, as the submissive. If you can keep that in mind, then you can carry this one little bit further and make this statement. Play this tune unless you're dealing with Mickey arrangements. Stock arrangements out of the book. Because Lester Lannon's still alive and he's watching. So the song would go like this. The further expansion of this would be that all ordinary secondary info is repentant. All. All right. In that, if you got to have proof, I've already proved it. It couldn't be actually growing, ordinary information. I said all information, all of it. It couldn't be growing, or else it would not need its normal opposition, nor its supporters, who of course have a vested interest, which is not a pejorative comment. But all ordinary information requires its opponents, its foes. Well, if you were just starting out with this, at least you've got to see all ordinary information has it. that is, has foes and opposition. And all information, of course, also, especially correct information, the kind that you have and think, all that information has its own supporters to prop it up, but there's always a vested interest. May I refer you back to a prime example of vested interest, like Stephen the Seventh propping up the late Pope Formosus. But he literally, not just what I've been talking about of ideas laying out there in the stadium, have got to be propped up to become three-dimensional, to become operational, for you to be able to focus on it. Any idea, I don't care, all the way from God to peanut butter, has got to be propped up. All ideas of goodness have got to be propped up. Behind, they've got to come up out of the grass, and you've got to prop up behind it the idea of evil. The idea of God, there's got to be an anti-God. There's got to be its opposition to prop the son of a bitch up, or you could not even think it. But the great example of why I liked it, the way the story goes, Stephen literally, of course after a year in the ground, you can imagine, besides other, had to literally prop up what was left of Formosus to try him and undo the acts that Stephen considered to be now unfavorable to his own regime. He had to literally prop the man up, the bones and whatever was left of him, to literally prop him up. Because if you prop up anything, you've got a vested interest. That means, and what was a greater vested interest than Stephen wanting to prop up this body at least long enough to condemn him, give him a chance to reply, which as it turned out he was correct. The late great had no reply, and so I rest my case, and he undid that, which was not suitable to his own ends. So back to what I was saying, that all ordinary secondary information is repentant. If it was otherwise, if it was actually growing, it would need no supporters, and it would have no opposition, which there is no such secondary information, is there? We're running out of time. The answer is no, there's not. I'll answer for you. Knowing how intelligent you are, you would have come to that conclusion very shortly. Or another way to look at it, if you would care to. You can also see that all ordinary information is repentant, that is non-growing, stagnant, in that it continues to be willing, nay, continues to be anxious. Ordinary information to do what? Is this a quiz? To explain itself. Now I'll give you a variation of one of our recent common themes, is even city information wants to tell you what kind of guy it is. If ordinary secondary information was actually explanatory, if it meaningfully explained anything, then you tell me this. Why does it then have to explain itself? Again, I rest my case. All right. You don't hear it? We have not changed the subject that much from the beginning of this evening. But all ordinary information of every sort, hard science, soft science, conventional wisdom, religious, the statements do not stand by themselves. If you look now at the possibility that we had already been through earlier this year, possibility that talk, then emotions, those words and emotions, undoubtedly, from a certain view, have the possibility of having a life of their own. If you can see that, and then you look at information, and you think, well, if there is information that's of some value, especially if it came from the institutions of either higher learning or religious, or they would have, if it's anywhere, information that addresses a particular question and says, all right, this is it. Is there such information? Now, there's information that appears to be that. at the end of every episode of Dallas, it says the end. Or if it didn't say the end literally, they begin to roll the credits and you know it's the end. It's almost 10 o'clock or whatever time it is. But is that the end of it? Does information that apparently has some intrinsic value, that apparently explains something, does it present itself and that's it? Is it presented to humanity and that's it? No, some information does. There's lots of it going around, but it's just done one time and then forgotten. And so you never heard of it. The information that's remembered, the great ideas of the world, why are they remembered? Because they will not shut up. They're worse than your brother-in-law, who grins and his engine lopes and he plays in a Mickey band. And all he wants to do is continue to talk about himself, to tell you what kind of guy he is. That doesn't sound like all the world's great ideas and knowledge. If it's so great, how come it can't shut up? If a sentence, if an idea, take anything you want, God is love. There's a good one. The gods are love, or whatever. If that's it, if people go, that's it, there's no doubt. If that is it, why does that thing not shut up? Why does it have to continually, constantly, to new people, new generations, to somebody just joined up the particular group that believes that? And it's like, here comes this idea, God is love, for instance, or love thy neighbor, anything you want. Cheap carpet grins. If that is an actual explanation that is meaningful, why does it have to continue to come around and go, you've probably heard of me. I'm such and such idea. And you go, yeah? And it says, well, let me tell you a little more about myself. And people listen. And they go, and it creates more and more information, right? That if there was such thing, to get at a crude level, if I have to real quick, the great holy books, the Old Testament, the Quran, if that was the final word of everything, which I've given you a break. I've gone beyond one sentence. We're talking about a damn book full of stuff. That we're now narrowing it down to one sentence. It's a book full, thousands of pages. But this is it. This is it. The word of the gods. Creation talk right here. The one book can't shut up. Go check into a library anywhere on this planet that has a library. And find their section in the Dewey Decimal System. I bet he's tired of having to catalog all those things. Well, he couldn't get elected president. He had to have a job. You look in the religious section and find, look under Islam. You get down to Quran. They got a copy of the Quran, or of course they got a copy of the Bible, I'll assume. And you think, well, there it is. There is the explanation of Judaism and Christianity. You get two for your money there. Or if not that, in Islam, the Quran, there it is. Everything you'd want to know. But no such luck. If they got a nice section in the religious area of Islam, the Quran will be there. One book. But I mean a big old fat book. The book that tells you everything you need to know from Allah. Right? Well, it's real curious. They got this one book, but then they're going to have what? You know what's coming. Another 100, 1,000 other books, commentaries on the Quran. Do you follow? Do you see any connection between, it's almost as though life will not allow, has not constructed the ordinary intellect in such a way that people can look upon themselves, the workings of man, not out here in what it seems to be the movable state and the institutional state, but in here, and in some way go, Contrary, many people say the whole idea of life is to continue to go, and to say, well, I tried, but I didn't make it. I repeat, since we're running out, I would suggest it might be the easiest way to consider it if you want to pursue it, is simply that secondary, since I started out and made a statement with this paragraph, that all ordinary secondary information is repentant. All of it. And once you begin to see that, then at least even your ordinary intelligence, it should affect one's view that, well, certain ideas are better than others. Certain ideas are more true than others. Oh, yeah? Well, certain ideas, obviously, anybody knows this, certain ideas are superior in their validity. Some ideas are better, more truthful, more representative of life, or some aspect of life, than other ideas are. Oh, yeah? If there are exceptions to me saying that all secondary information is repentant, how come they continue to talk? How come they whine? How come they have to give, well, I'm sorry I'm late today. I'm sorry I'm limping. They cannot shut up. Now, of course, you don't have to look out there. Yeah, there are a few things I know. Some things I still don't have a good handle on, but there are one or two things that I really know about. In fact, would you like me to tell you? No, you've told me before. Forget that I'm two people doing this. That doesn't sound familiar? There's a few things I know for sure. Really? Well, won't you shut up? Or look at it as being the information itself, the words themselves being alive. That a sentence confronts humanity. It says, here is the truth, and it says whatever it is. God wouldn't grin, or God's not cheap carpet, whatever it is. And you think, all right, that's it. This is the information. It says yes. Just wait a second. Be showbiz, count 1, 2, and wait for the shoe to drop. And this great, meaningful information is going to say, in fact, let me elaborate on that. If that's it, who needs elaboration? If this is the end of Dallas, if this is the end of the series, well, you need to know. But all ordinary secondary information always says, tune in next time. I thought this was it. We got to send a night show. It's awfully hard, since I only got a few seconds, not to point out. I hate for this to sound like what kind of guys we all are. But the chi-roots and this, does anybody see that from another view, even though it's dealing with sound waves, is an attempt to do exactly that same thing? Not what I just talked about, but to do the same thing. That is, there's nothing else to say. But until you realize that, boy, is there a lot to say. But when it has any meaning, it is not self-referring, it is not sequential, it's not reasonable, and it's certainly not true. But I've told you that from the beginning. Above all things, it is not true. It may be funny, that is, it makes you laugh, it may make you go, it may make you make a note, but there's one thing for damn sure, it's not true. You can count on that. After that, once you understand that, if information says, all right, what I've just said, this information, not me, but the information speaking, I'm not true. Then after that, if it continues to want to tell you what kind of guy it is, at least you got a fighting chance. Well, unless you're ordinary, and then of course you forget.